I'm going to talk to you about measuring consumer emotions using now mobile implicit neuromarketing methods. So obviously here in Asia, where the smartphone is king, brand communication has clearly evolved from an effective one-way dialogue to a two-way interactive, a monologue, to a dialogue with consumers. And most brand owners will now know that in order to effectively communicate with their customers, they need to be able to respond immediately to their needs at any given point in time. And in order to achieve this, obviously what they need is access to quality consumer insights. And that's what I want to talk about in the next half hour or so. How we can now do this using a mobile version of an implicit neuromarketing technique that can deliver and analyze results back in real time from mobile devices. Excuse me. So I'll just take a quick step back for those of you who are unfamiliar with neuromarketing. This is one of the fastest growing sectors in the market research sphere and effectively applies the study of the brain and psychology to marketing. Now, there are a range of different methods, but they share the same remit in that they effectively are there to capture consumers' subconscious or implicit or gut reactions to brands, products, and marketing communications. So why would you actually want to do this? Well, we now know from neuroscience that a huge amount of our behavior is actually determined by brain processes that operate at a lower level of consciousness. And therefore, if you're simply doing market research at the conscious level, you're missing out on a huge wealth of drivers, emotions, feelings, and so forth that percolate underneath people's conscious surface. So you're only really capturing the tip of the iceberg, and therefore that can be harmful in terms of making predictions about how people are going to behave, because you're making decisions based on partial data. So how big is this problem? Well, as you can see, this is SMR findings that the global research turnover in 2012 for market research was around 40 billion, of which Asia Pacific accounts for 16%. So that's a huge chunk of cash, $6 billion. And how effective is this spend on traditional qual, quant, and other market research techniques? Ernst & Young did a survey of many of the multinationals here in 2012 and found that whilst many of these big global companies are actually hubbed here, both in Singapore and beyond in Southeast Asia, only 20% of them were actually making a profit. So there's clearly a gap between what people are telling them in terms of whether their products are going to fly or not, and what they're actually doing in the marketplace. And we believe that neuromarketing measures which capture these kind of subconscious cultural influences, norms, desires, and so forth, which aren't accessible through introspection, but if we can uncover them using the techniques and tools now that we have, we might be able to at least close that gap between what people respond or tell us and how they're going to behave. Now, the neuromarketing field has undergone a pretty massive transformation in the last 15 years. So initially when this whole field started, as you can see, it's very neuro-based as opposed to psychology-based. And a lot of the companies will be called neuro something or other. So we were using, a lot of the early companies using brain imaging, so putting people in MRI scanners to find out which pair of baked beans they like, whatever. Or using EEG, so they strap some electrodes to your head and so forth. And more recently, this has been the use of bio belts, which are more portable, if you like, because you can wander around with them. But they are rather limited in terms of the kinds of emotions they can measure. So they can measure things like, arousal, maybe attention, and so forth. And then you've got the psychometric measures, which effectively tap behavior. So the other two are tapping either neural or brain responses or physiological responses, and you've got psychometric measures which tap into behavior which is driven again by subconscious brain systems. And these include eye tracking, facial emotion decoding, and implicit reaction times. And what we've seen is that as the world has become digitized, those companies in neuromarketing that are really sort of skimming to the top now have been able to adapt their methodologies to become web-based and now digitally based or mobile-based. And the reason for this is partly because obviously it enables people to capture information there and then, in context, in store and so forth, but they're very scalable and cost-effective techniques, and they still provide an awful lot of information, which, in fact, I would say even more so than some of the earlier heavy medical technology methods. So the reason that using MRI scanners wasn't entirely efficient in the long term, and as obviously the world has grown and moved on to a digital environment, is that we can't kind of recreate or simulate this kind of scenario where people are out walking using their digital phone and gathering information in a brain scanner. So one of the things that I sort of think about is, in fact, it's sort of entertaining that, you wonder who's in whose hands here, because although today consumers hold your devices in their hands, they still have now an increasing desire or need to be handheld themselves, as often as possible and through many different contexts of the day. So there they are going into shops, checking the prices, checking with their friends, should I buy this, should I not, and so forth. So how can we actually measure those gut instinct responses, those sort of deep emotions that happen when people are shopping? And the time taken to head down, if you're in Fair Price or cold storage, how much time as you roll down with your trolley do you take to make a decision? Well, most of the time we buy the same sort of things, and it's a very sort of split-second sort of thing. Therefore, we need to measure the brain that's going on. What are the thoughts and emotions at the split-second level? And a lot of this is predicated on thinking fast and slow. This is Daniel Kahneman, who wrote this book. You can get it at any airport. And he basically summed up over 100 years of neuroscience research about how the brain broadly works. And it can be divided into two decision-making routes, or two systems, if you like, which he describes as System 1, which is very old in evolutionary terms. And it measures, or is effectively could be equivalent to unconscious thoughts and emotions. It operates very, very quickly in milliseconds. It's involuntary, so it's automatic. For example, if we were dogs and had tails, you wag when you're very excited to see. Luckily, we don't have that, but that's the kind of response it will give you. And it's also associative. So it stores information about a new thing in very close proximity to things which are similar to it. This is what we call implicit responses, and they guide a lot of our decision-making and our emotions and our behavior. Then we have the much later evolved conscious thinking area called, or region, called System 2. It's slow because it's very controlled and it's rule-based. It's the type of brain that's thinking before I speak, that's considering whether I should or shouldn't say something, thinking about what somebody might feel if I gave the wrong answer. So all of those things actually sometimes cloud the real truth, what people really feel, even sometimes if they don't know themselves, which is going on beneath the surface. And that's what we're trying to get at, because those emotions actually are the ones that come to the fore at the point of sale. That's when they really make the decision. Okay, so that's what we need to measure. So for those of you who need a bit more of evidence, apart from me standing up here, and who am I anyway, I'm going to give you a little demonstration. So it's a bit of audience participation, which I know everybody loves in Singapore. So I'm going to actually ask you to articulate. So what I want you to do here is to look at the color and just read out, or just tell me the color. So the answer here is red. You keep going, so if I don't hear you, I will stop, and that'll be more embarrassing. Okay, let's go. Black. Faster. Green. For those of you who wonder how sophisticated or mature your subconscious brain is, Well, it seems it can pretty much process words and speech and so forth well before the conscious front-end GUI, if you like, can make a decision about what color you're going to read out on there. So I think, think about that for a sec. All that was happening at a level below your conscious awareness, and you could not control it, even though you well know what the color is. So that's why it's so important to, in addition to capturing what people tell us about how they feel, what they like, and so forth, we capture the reasons behind it at a subconscious level. And if you look at a cognitive timeline, you'll see here that these responses happen very quickly. So as kind of that Stroop, so what I've just shown you is called the Stroop effect, happens in a very millisecond. So at time 0, if I flash up a card or so forth, it will take your brain about 200 milliseconds to start processing it. It will have elaborated that processing to a very deep level, identified what it is, what it's associated with, the past experiences you may have had with that object that you've just seen. It will all be done by about 500 or 600 milliseconds. So in brain terms, that's a really long time. But then, of course, your conscious brain kicks in, and around 600 milliseconds, 700 milliseconds or so, it starts thinking about, oh, yeah, I remember that object. Oh, yes. Now, what should I say about this? I don't know. Do I like the person I'm talking to? Maybe I should say this if I don't. So it's that kind of confound that we're trying to remove from the data. And that's why if we put you into a scenario, or respondents into a scenario, where we're asking them to make responses within that red time window, we can be sure that the data we get is not confounded by conscious rationalization. Now, the other thing that you need to understand about the subconscious brain is that when we're measuring the speed of your responses, what we're effectively doing is trying to get at the strength of association, which is reflected in the speed of your response, the strength of the association between certain concepts and emotions. So, for example, if I want to find out about how you feel about BMW, I'd want to find out the speed with which you respond to that brand when I start priming you with either positive or negative words beforehand and measuring which ones are closer. I'll talk to you about how this happens. So the logic behind these implicit methods is quite straightforward. We first of all train subjects, so they'll log in online. So we use online panels like any other qualitative research company. Quantitative research company. So I call this kind of quantitative research at a different level of consciousness. So we'll train you first to respond to, for example, two brands. So you'll learn very quickly to press the E key on your keyboard if BMW logo appears on the screen. If Audi appears, we train you to press the I key. This takes most people around 15 to 20 seconds to learn this task and can be done by kids as young as 8. So once we've trained you to do this very, very simple task, the only task that you will do for us during the test, we're now going to manipulate subconsciously, without your awareness, we're going to manipulate the efficiency with which you respond to those two logos. So turns out, because of that Stroop thing that I showed you about, flashing up a word, you read it automatically, right, before your conscious brain has time to do anything about it. So you couldn't read those colors. Excuse me. So what we would do is, just before you have to make a discrimination as to whether one or other logo appeared, we will flash up a range of different attributes. Could be, in this case, sporty, adventurous, fast, sexy, and so forth. And what we'd be doing is measuring the speed with which you now respond to either BMW or Audi. And this is effectively how it works. So when the word sporty appears, it will immediately prime your brain to anticipate the brand that is most closely in your head, related to that concept. So if sporty appears, and in my head, I've stored it closely with BMW, and BMW appears, I'm already primed. I will be much faster to respond. Split seconds, I will be literally milliseconds, but it's a very long time in terms of the brain. On the other hand, if I'm expecting BMW and Audi appears, I'm confused, have to stop a minute, and then make the alternative response. So now my response is slowed. Now with multiple trials on any given test like this, and obviously of collecting data across multiple subjects, you get very strong statistical differences in the reaction time between each attribute that you're testing and either brand. And you can then plot the data effectively, any way you want to, but in terms of the reaction time differences, and you analyze this statistically. So you can identify then, for example, these are two brands, this is actual data. Below the line, these attributes belong to our client brand, and above the line, the 0 mark, those are the ones that belong to the competitor. And you can put a sort of degree of statistical effect size on that, so you can see which are very strongly associated and which are not. So this is quite handy if you want to conduct a range of experiments to do with how people feel about brands in different contexts. We do a lot of this work in terms of in packaging. I mean, almost anything that you can imagine can be tested this way. And you can, and then people always ask, so what kind of attributes do you test? Well, many companies will have a psychological framework of psychological needs and rewards. And that's fine. But you also have category-specific words. If you're testing holidays, you might have a whole range of words that are relevant to a particular location and so forth. So this is one very brief study that we did just to illustrate how you can use the data, and then I'm going to show you how we're doing it now on a mobile device. This is a study that was done by Neurosense for a global cosmetic brand, and what the question they had is, look, every time we adapt our packaging, the competitor adapts theirs, right? So we need to know, who owns what colors, because if we want to relaunch this particular brand, we need to either sort of play in the blue ocean space, or we're going to take them head on. But we need to know what's in competitors' heads, or to, split second-wise. And you go into duty-free, they're grabbing the competitor products, even though they're looking for our brand. So we tested 450 women in the US and China, and I'm pulling out this study so you can see the extent of the cross-cultural differences here. And we use an online panel, the login. It looks like a normal quantitative study. They're asked demographic questions, brand usage, cut by whatever else you want. And then they do a implicit test. And in terms of what did we flash up, I've previously shown that we use the word sporty. But you can use, obviously, a range of word attributes and visual attributes. So in this case, they were testing, we're going to flash up colors before they have to make the discrimination before, is that belonging to our brand or that brand? Remember, they're doing this automatically and very, very, very fast. Let's look at the patterns, the typography, the shapes. How about some of these celebrities? They're saying, we're paying some of these women a bloody lot of money. And I've got a nasty feeling that people are associating one of them in particular with our competitors. So every time, that we spend $1 million on her face coming out on an advert in the US, everybody's thinking about our competitor. So selling line symbols and so forth. And then we have a range of brand attributes that they wanted to test. Some very familiar, trusted for me, is it modern, mature, classy, and so forth, and some differences between China and US in terms of things like fair skin. And after we've run the study, then and the data are automatically analyzed, you can then plot that by typography, color, shape, celebrity, and so forth, so that, again, everything now above the line belongs to our client competitor, and everything beneath the line belongs to our client brand, and below the line belongs to the competitor. So it's a very kind of persuasive, it's also a very easy way of finding out the answer to what's often a complicated question. If you try to do this explicitly, people are quite good at sort of rank ordering, if you like, things for a while, and then they get bored, and then they're not really sure, because they know what they should be associating with a brand, even though at the split-second level they may not be. And when we looked actually at the cross-cultural differences, this is actually some of their data, you can see they're very marked in terms of the way the brand is perceived and the colors and the aspects or visual assets of the brand across two different locations. So the idea of this approach is to really get at the why behind the changes. They can obviously see what's going on in terms of sales figures. They need to get at what can they do, how can they change. And what they did find was that some of their celebrity endorsers were being automatically associated with their direct competitor. Anyway, so this directly fed, this kind of data can feed directly into new brand positioning and pack design, and it's a really nice complement to standard qual and quant. Now, just to give you an idea, and this will take just, if I've got 5 minutes left. Oh, I've got, well, I have to sing a poem or sing or something. So how are we actually now doing it in a digital environment? So these tests can be adapted, have been adapted, in order to give an individual readout rather than group average data. So this is one scenario that we are working on at the moment in collaboration with another company, which we do not provide security cameras, however they do. So these kinds of smart cameras actually provide tracking information to my company's customer query system. So what kind of information, I know this looks a bit Big Brotherish, but it can provide information about, obviously if you're male, female, rough age group, and it can be individualized in due course, can do pretty effective facial recognition. Now, if you're wandering into the shop, what it can detect is what you're looking at. And at that point, one of the things which stop people buying things is they can't make a decision between two things. And it's particularly the case when men go in to buy, birthday or Christmas presents, for their loved ones. And they'll wander into Gucci or Armani and get stuck on two handbags, maybe ask the sales guy, but what does he know about the wife, and so on. And so that actually becomes sort of, you get this kind of cognitive dissonance, and you just rush off and, well, I won't buy anything, I'll just go back to the office, ask my secretary, safer option. So that doesn't really help, of course, the brands to actually sell. What we found is a sort of social psychological experiment, that there is another validator you can use. Yes, you can now use your mobile and talk to your friends, but that assumes that guys would actually talk to their friends about which handbag to buy. Maybe, I don't think so. So this sort of system will recognize what you're looking at. And then this is a downloadable app which will help you decide. Now what that means is it gives you access to your gut instinct response. So you can use not the sales guy, you can use yourself as the validator, because at the end of the day, your brain knows your spouse or your girlfriend better than you do. Certainly better than the guy behind the counter. So it will say, right, we've noticed through the cameras what you're looking at. Now you can use this as an automated system through cameras, or you can just use this yourself. So you just take a picture of handbag 1 versus handbag 2, or scarf 1 versus scarf 2. And then we get you to play a very simple little game, which is predicated on the market research tool that we have. It's called, again, You Decide, because you can decide to override the result if you wish. And users are instructed to obviously press either the left or right button when they see the color on the screen. In this case, it's not two handbags, but she can't decide between two colors of the scarf. And this is not a realistic example because most women will just buy both, right? Okay. So then a range of attributes that are positive will appear before the color purple, and in random order and randomized, etc., before the yellow color, and it will capture the speed of your responses. Very quickly, and it does an automatic calculation of the closeness of association between the two colors and the positive words versus the negative words. And hopefully I can't wait for the anticipation. you prefer. Okay, purple. So it's a very simple example, but you get the general gist here. This can be used to make any comparison across anything you like. And in fact, funnily enough, when I was doing this ages ago as a demo in the States for one of our sort of client workshops, and I left this out so you could put any two things in you want. The number of people who put in their two kids to make it sort of find out who they really, really liked was kind of shocking, and rather sort of made me realize we needed a few disclaimers in there. But, you know, as a social psychologist in my past life, that's the point, is that it turns out that if you use yourself as a validator and you have a point of validation like this, no matter how accurate or not it might be, and I would say it's certainly more accurate than walking out the store or guessing, people will actually buy. So, you know, it's tipping you off the fence to make a decision. So it's quite a useful tool in that respect for helping people to come to the decision which is really the one that they really want to come to. So in half an hour, what can I tell you about neuro-implicit tools? I mean, it's a big field, but suffice to say, there are lots of methods and companies and approaches out there. They're very scalable, they're fast and cost-effective. They're highly flexible, they can operate as plug and play into standard quantitative methods as well. They're very specific because they give you actionable insight because you get an answer to a very specific question. And you get a very high degree of granularity in terms of the nature of the information. So you can have like 70 different attributes in there at any time. It's very easy to use and easy to perform. And we've now got it working on digital devices. So thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Gosh, fantastic. So clearly explained. Questions?
Yes.
Who likes purple?
So it was really interesting presentation. I just had one question. Because you're trying to really calculate on the fractions of speeds and how the difference is, practically when we put this in use in research, how much does like the network congestion and the volatility of data speed, even within a single session, affect the results, and how do you mitigate that?
It's because the tools that we use are actually not running across the internet. Once you go there, download automatically onto the digital device, detect which smartphone you're using, and we use the timing in that device. So therefore, we understand something about timing and can calibrate accordingly. We don't try and run it across the internet.
More hands. Yes, over there. Who's got the microphone? Oh gosh, that's quick.
Robin from Skim. I was wondering what happens when you want to compare more than 2 items.
Well, we've got a version that does a single item. If you want to do multiple items, you have to do them in A, B, B, C sort of fashion. They're actually, like, I've just shown you one test, which is called semantic priming, but there are other implicit paradigms that we use in different contexts, which allows you to do sort of 4 or 6 things simultaneously. I just talked about one today. Yes. Can I say how they work?
No, can the human mind do that easily, like comparing?
Oh,
4
yeah,
and
yeah, yeah,
6
yeah.
or
Because it's not. It's a slightly different test. It's basically, in that case, we have a little ladybird. It's a bug thing, which you detect on either left, right, or up, down quadrant. So it's not using words. It's using a visual search task at a very high speed.
Over there, please. You do next.
Munish from IPG. My question was, when you're comparing between 2 products, and since it's based on the speed of reaction, so is it just comparison between 2 products or multiple products, or you have like category benchmarks that this speed is good enough to associate with it?
Yes, yes, we do have actually category sort of benchmarks because we've got a massive. We've been doing this for a very long time, but it's a comparative technique. So the speed is always calibrated against your speed. So remember, the speed with which you respond, all things being equal, even if you are a slow responder in general, will be the same on the left side as the right. Sorry. And therefore, it's an internal control. Do you see what I mean? So that it's not that you'll go faster for some categories or slower. What we do have is category information about which words are most closely associated with, for example, intent to purchase across different categories.
Hello. First of all, thank you very much for your speech. I was just wondering, when you were showing the implicit methodology and it was the reaction-based and you show a brand and there are adjectives or vocabularies that's showing, do you have a validated set of vocabularies and you use the same vocabularies for all of the research, or do you select the adjectives case by case?
Oh, okay. No, we have a fixed framework, so a fixed set of words that fall into specific psychological rewards, but and you could see them as little modules. So you could have the ITP module, or you could have the brand loyalty module, of which we've seen there's a correlation between those words and how strongly they're associated and what's happened, in terms of purchase and so forth. But there's also category specific. So if you've got like cornflakes or something like that, right? Things like crunchy or the sensory aspects and properties. You can add them in, or you can select. So you could, to be quite honest, if you don't want any of the words within our psychological framework and you've got your own, then you can run those too.
Thank you, Professor.